Welcome to Chain Reaction, the Foreign Policy Research Institute's flagship network of podcast series examining the political, security, economic, and social trends shaping Europe and Eurasia. Throughout the year, we're talking with experts about developments in Russia's war in Ukraine, the new European security order, the past, present, and future of the Baltic states, Russia's political economy, and great power competition in the region. Join us each month for
Bear Market Brief,
Baltic Ways,
Report in Short,
and of course, our flagship, Chain Reaction. New episodes are available each week on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. This week on Report in Short.
This is Report in Short, the podcast where we bring you FPRI Eurasia program research in a bite-sized format. I'm your host, Aaron Schwartzbaum. On the docket for today, the Kremlin's Balancing Act, the war's impact on regional power dynamics. We are joined by report author and Eurasia Program Fellow Andras Toscifra. Don't forget to check out the full report down below. This is Report in Short. Andras, welcome back to Report in Short.
Thank you for having me.
So, why this topic, Russian regional politics, and why now?
So, as you know, I have been looking at Russian regional politics, subnational conflicts, subnational governance for FPRI for quite a while now. And I think that it is an under-researched aspect of Russia's domestic politics. Whenever we are talking about how the war has changed Russia, we usually focus on things like sanctions enforcement or the price of crude oil, or we focus on who's the defense minister, who's the head of the FSB, who's the secretary of the Security Council. And of course, these are important aspects of politics, but I think there's a lot that conversation often tends to miss here. And what I have been trying to do with not just this report, but the previous ones that are kind of linked to it, is to highlight that there's a lot of tension that the constraints that the Russian government itself created for itself by prioritizing the war has generated, and that these tensions are probably a little more visible on the regional level, where people are where governors are forced to follow new priorities, but at the same time they can't get ahead, get the same jobs in Moscow that they were once promised, where people see their properties in danger because of the Kremlin's nationalization campaign, where there is now an elite rotation, or the necessity for regional elites to make room for the so-called new elite that the war has created, or that the war has elevated. And a lot of different tensions like this. So these are the issues that I wanted to highlight in this particular report that focuses specifically on Central regions relations and how those have changed over the past 3 years.
It is a fascinating set of issues. I always thought of regional politics as where the rubber meets the road for a lot of the broader national issues. And so let's talk about what's changing. And the alliterative frame I came up with for my questions are the three P's here. There's people, who is doing the leading in regions and how is that changing? There's the payments, there's the money question, what's happening with budgets. And then there's power, which was just a way of shoehorning in the law and how that has impacted these regional politics. So let's start with the people. What changes are we seeing in the status and or identity persona of governors these days? And mayors too. Let's throw them in.
So let me start with just reminding everyone that the war has in many ways accelerated an already existing trend, which was the centralization of political power in Russia. And with it, of course, fiscal centralization. Even before the war, there was a trend for the Kremlin to desire a kind of a more uniformized leadership in the regions that was more divorced from the regional elites themselves. And the war has not changed this. It changed the perhaps certain modalities of how this goal is achieved, because we have, for instance, seen in several regions, governors with local links appointed that the Russian political scientist Alexander Kinev called federalized locals, to people who were born in a region but then had a federal job or built a federal loyalties, and then they returned to their region to take up political office there. So we have seen some of this, but we have also seen people with sort of not, I wouldn't say strongman credentials, but certainly the backing of either law enforcement or a prosecutorial background to lead certain problematic regions. For instance, Dmitry Timeshin, who was appointed to lead the Khabarovsk region, or like most recently Alexander Hinstein, who was appointed to lead the Kursk region, where Ukraine led an incursion since, or has led an incursion since August last year. So we have seen a certain adaptation to the new realities of specifically the fact, for instance, that due to the war, there has been a clog of these promotional avenues that these professionalized governors have usually relied on. It's been more difficult to get promotions to federal jobs, which has been a core promise of this system for the people who are in it. And at the same time, governors have had to juggle more responsibilities. They had to, for instance, oversee recruitment for the war. They had to take part in the regulation of local economies, keeping prices where they are, or where they are acceptable to the wider population, and a lot more. Most recently, they have also been tasked with raising fertility numbers, for instance, or ensuring that war participants are appointed to certain positions in regional institutions. So there is this aspect of it. And as far as regional elites go, who do have a root in a region, they have faced a different reality as well. So we have seen the federal government kind of trying to scale back the power sharing agreements that existed before the war and go after the last vestiges of the political power of local elites where they could. So the recently adopted municipal reform is an example of that empowered Kremlin appointed governors vis-a-vis mayors, for instance, that the expansion of the electronic and online voting system is another, like I think, maybe less discussed aspect of this, which allows the Kremlin to rely less on local executors for the purposes of electoral engineering. There was some movement in movement towards digitalizing and automating data collection that the federal government relies on. And of course, there were specific conflicts between governors and local elites. For instance, in the Vologda region, there was a conflict between Alexei Mordashov, who's the owner of Severstal, so-called main industrial establishment of the region that has traditionally been dominating local politics, and Georgy Filimonov, who was the Kremlin-appointed governor. So we see the same thing in Khabarovsk, where I have mentioned before, between the new governor, who has taken a sort of anti-corruption flair to dealing with local elites, and we see this in several other regions where there are still powerful local actors that the Kremlin is trying to push them back. So this is more or less what happened to people and a little bit to power.
Yeah. So, one question. So, we know that Putin has broadly been interested in nationalization and centralizing power. Was there any particularly expedient need to increase that process because of the war? Was it just general chaos of closer management and prosecution of the war? Did something happen per se?
I think what we have seen is the war has certainly created a general anxiety about domestic stability because it didn't work out quite the way the Kremlin had originally planned it. And therefore, there was both an opportunity to sort of securitize domestic politics further, to empower the security services and their regional offices that have also, after a hiatus of a couple of I think maybe not exactly 2 years, but after a hiatus of, let's say, 2 years, started again arresting former governors, heads of development corporations, regional officials of sorts, of all sorts, and mayors once again. The main purpose, I think, is to ensure that there's no local political axis of power emerging between these regional officials who have their own motivations as they can't get ahead. They can't. Their avenues of promotion are drying up, and the local elites. So I think this is certainly one of the main reasons. Another reason is probably just that there was an opportunity, and that the Kremlin saw and took, and this would have been the natural direction of development of the policy that they had followed before the war.
An
Uh,
acceleration
it's
is
just an acceleration, yeah.
so is basically Putin. It sounds like is trying to. There's no principal agent problem if there are no agents. If there's only a principal, then everything allegedly will get done with less friction. We touched on the law a little bit. We can certainly continue with it, but the money, the payments first. What changes have we seen in the management of regional economies and transfers the money given from the center out to these regions?
Well, if I want to be short about it, I would say that regional economies did fairly well in the first year of the war, and it was after that economies started experiencing, or regional fiscal receipts started experiencing the effects of the the slowdown, let's say, of the consumer economy. Because when we talk about the Russian economy, of course, there is an economic boom, but it is mostly focused and concentrated on the industries that support the defense industrial complex or are adjacent to it. So we have seen certain regions that relied on exports, for instance, to the West, timber, for instance, or steel, tanking, especially after the domestic construction industry took a downturn last year. We have seen industries relying, regions relying on coal extraction experience a downturn because of the cheap coal prices on the global market, including transportation bottlenecks and several other factors. So when we talk about regional economies, you always need to stress that the war did not impact all regions in the same way. But on the whole, what we see when we look at the transfers that many regional budgets depend on, we see for this year a cut in nominal terms, of course also in real terms. If you factor in inflation, that cut is even larger because of the prioritization of war-related expenditures at the federal level, on the army, on the quote-unquote reconstruction of the occupied territories, a myriad other things. And while the federal budget also can rely on increased tax rates and the fiscal revenues from these will benefit the federal budget and not the regional budgets, which have seen little, if any, fiscal relief over the past years, apart from the forgiving of debts held by the federal government, which will not cover all the extra expenditures that they need to shoulder. If we are just looking at regional budgets, which finance things like healthcare or education or local authorities and all the functions that they perform, if we, for instance, we just think about the wildfires that have recently started in Russia, as they do every year around late April, then of course those functions can be impacted by a lack of funds and regional budgets.
Okay, last question. The law. We've heard more about canceling direct elections. Tell me more about what's changing.
So the municipal reform basically completes the public administration reform that started in 2021. It was adopted in the first reading in 2022, but then they put it on hold because of a major pushback from regional elites. Why was there a pushback? Well, this law basically gets rid of the lower tier of Russian municipal power and the institutions that support it. So we're talking about thousands of local authorities, their elected representatives, which of course did not have large political and financial power and were pretty reliant on transfers from higher level budgets, but also they were the first level of public authority that most Russians dealt with. And those are going to be folded into so-called municipal districts. What has changed over the past 3 years is that some regions can or receive the opportunity to hold on to the two-tier system that has been the norm so far. But at the same time, the scrapping of direct mayoral elections is going to be the norm throughout the country, which was already the case in most regions that have removed direct mayoral elections, often accompanied by conflicts and protests in regional capitals. And mayors are going to be subordinate to the regional governments in much the same way, although not exactly the same, much the same way as governors are subordinate to the president. This is the law. This is the latest law, but it has again. This just completes a decades long centralization of political power. And one of the reasons why this is happening officially is to spare money, which is doubtful if it will make a lot of difference. But at the same time, I believe it will create risks for the Kremlin, because it looks like it may lead to a further deterioration of public services and a further deterioration of the relationship between locals and public authorities.
Thank you, Andres, for joining. Check out the report in the podcast episode description. We will be back to you soon. Thanks to Andras and to you, listener, for joining. We hope you enjoyed. Report in Short is a project of the Foreign Policy Research Institute, that's FPRI, a nonpartisan think tank based in Philadelphia. For more information on this initiative and on many others, visit fpri.org. We'll catch you next time on Report in Short.